600 people every single day. So that's how many people in the UK quit their jobs to become a full-time carer for an elderly or disabled relative. 600 a day. Not because they're planned to, not because they're prepared for it, but because one day life just changed. Welcome to Heels in the Hierarchy, the podcast for women who are building careers, managing teams, and trying to live a full life while navigating everything that comes with it. I'm SJ.
And I'm Pegsy. And today we're talking about something that is absolutely everywhere right now, in living rooms, on group chats, in hushed conversations outside office doors, but almost never in the actual workplace conversation itself.
So we're going to be talking about what happens when we're building careers and actually your parents start needing you in a whole different way.
Because if you're in that place right now, I have been, you're answering work emails from hospital waiting rooms, you may be managing a team, while quietly worrying about a parent or just feeling stretched in every direction at once. If that's you, this episode is for you. I still think elder care is one of the least discussed realities in the workplace. We have got better at talking about parenting and the challenges that brings. Obviously, we've got flexible working, we've got good maternity care. Paternity care, I think, needs to improve, but, at least we're getting some. Even support for people with the menopause, finally. But this one, yes, there are organisations that do offer elder care support, but it's not simply about the support. I think it's about the issue and being able to talk openly as a woman in a leadership position on how that might impact you personally and in a work capacity. It's still very much whispered.
Oh, well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the impact of that. So you may not be the one who's needing support, but the weight of responsibility becomes on your shoulders, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so if we go back to the numbers are stark. Around 1.4 million people in the UK are what's called sandwich carers. I've not really heard that term before, but it's caring for elderly or disabled relatives whilst also raising children of their own.
And you're the bit stuck in the middle.
It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what I think about it, but it's an interesting concept, sandwich carers. But the majority of those carers are women.
Mm.
So that is quite a lot. So if 600 people a day are leaving employment to look after a family member, and that's 1.4 million UK sandwich carers, which majority are women.
Yep.
1 in 7 of the UK workforce is then currently a carer. That is huge. I mean, I think we've both been in positions where we've needed to do that. We talk about women in the workplace, and so I think this has been like an overdue topic that we've all had experiences of. But this is the right time to, I think, on the right platform, I suppose, to really show. We talk about women juggling so many things, but I'm so glad we're doing this because I think hopefully for those who it is impacted with may feel reassured and actually listened and heard, and we're seeing you.
Yeah, and I think the value of this episode is that we can start encouraging, even in a small way, women in the workplace who are either currently struggling with this, juggling all of the challenges, spinning all of the plates, or may need to address it now for the benefit of women in their workplace who may need to deal with those in the future. And I think that's because when we talk about the caring load, people often picture visiting your elder relatives at weekends. You might occasionally drop in some shopping on the way home. You might have a quick catch-up phone call every evening or a good morning phone call at the start of the day. But there's so much more to it.
Yeah, and that's just part of it. I think when you were saying it, I was just like, how many people have I spoken to, supported, manage who have got elder parents who are aging, they also have experienced, I know we're going to talk about anticipatory grief, but just the shock of seeing their parents change and their
Yeah.
need, but yet they're still in a season of needing their parents because of where they're at in their careers in terms of childcare and navigating workload, etc. But also it's just, it just brought to mind somebody that we that previously employed, and it was a sudden need of support where just something just fell through for them, and there was no other plan in place because it was an unexpected
Mm.
incident with their parent.
Yeah.
You know,
And you can get time off for family
you can, of
emergencies.
course,
A lot of organisations do provide that as paid emergency leave.
short
Some
term.
short term, absolutely.
Yeah,
Some organisations don't. So again, there's a financial narrative going on in one's head as well about almost, can I afford to take this time off? But you're absolutely right. Short term.
it's short term, but also there's that about it being women. And this is probably a slight diversion, but it just made me think about the impact it has on women because we don't know what the family dynamic is.
Yeah.
And we talk about, positions that we put ourselves in. And depending what your family situation of siblings, for example, who automatically takes the lead on that?
Yeah.
What's the responsibilities? And I've had to manage people whose people in their family absolutely don't want to know.
Yeah.
And so they're the breadwinner for their family, yet they're having to organise all these appointments, supporting their parents, having to look after for carers whilst in full-time employed. This is the kind of world we're talking about, isn't it? Not just
Yeah.
weekend drop-ins, but
And one thing that occurred to me while you were speaking is your parents are always there, and the relative age difference between you obviously remains constant. For a lot of people, their parents had no life before they came along. It's just something that it just accidentally never really occurs to us that our parents were ever as young as we were at that point in time. And so the same challenge sometimes occurs with the thinking about your parents in the future as being elderly, but also the point about where the responsibility often falls. It's often to the elder child. It's often the female in a family, and or where there are either elder male children or no female children, it may be to the spouse of one of those
yeah.
children. So there is definitely a bias towards women taking on those elder care responsibilities and doing all of that, and then potentially going back into a meeting 5 minutes later.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting, isn't it, to think, and this is why we love doing this, these episodes on such relevant topics, because they need to be addressed, they need to be discussed. But I think this is just the tip of the iceberg when we think about this different elements, I think, of caring. What does that look like experience? Because it's not just the personal care, it's the financials, it's the bank accounts, it's organization.
Oh,
It's
100%.
it's the health. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be psych. And then also your relationship then shifts
Oh,
because
yeah.
you become you're parenting your parents,
Yeah.
and you're no longer seen as that. Well, in some cases, you're not necessarily your relationships completely shift, which is also what then I think then can increase around the anticipatory grief. You're witnessing and experiencing loss whilst your elder is still alive.
But also, it's your relationship with siblings, it's your relationship with partners and with children, as well as the relationship with that older parent, their spouse, and maybe their ex-spouse, and your relationship with your team. So there's so much impact. It's almost like the sort of the rings when you throw a pebble into water and the
The
rings,
ripples,
the
yeah.
ripples go out.
I think what's interesting from a leadership perspective then is that many women are actually developing, from what you just talked about, extraordinary skills through caregiving,
Mm.
resilience, empathy, complex coordination, emotional intelligence, which we've talked about before. And again, none of that will show up in a performance review or when we're looking at
Yeah.
things like that. But it also reminded when you're talking about is the demand, the mental load, but the expectation that is put on you to then still be able to perform.
Because organisations still tend to reward resilience. As a side note, I do have an issue with the way that we focus on resilience in the workplace as a badge of honour, that it's expected all the time, and we really ought to come up with something better. But that a focus on resilience doesn't recognise the cost of resilience. And to your point earlier, it doesn't really recognise that despite a challenging situation, these are skills, life skills, people skills that are being developed alongside but
And
the
I,
challenges of managing a situation such as this. Women are often praised for coping, but then they're quietly running on empty.
yeah, the other element I was thinking of is the loneliness in that
Yeah.
actually. And
Yeah.
I do want to say, anyone's listening to that, is that, if it resonates with you, we are always open to like sharing stories, building
Mm.
community. You're not alone in this. Both Pegsy and I have both gone through elder care, both are experienced around the challenges and the difficulties. And the other element of it is that not only lonely, but your identity changes
Yes.
because you become dependent on, you become so many things. But in workplace, your identity, your ambition, your career has a huge cost. So you kind
Yeah.
of forget, like, you're doing all of this, but you may be at the pivotal moment of your career when you want to progress. And that's that earlier around people leaving work because they have no choice, but then also just feeling so overexhausted and overwhelmed. It's not your fault.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you picked up on that ambition, because these things often happen seemingly out of the blue. And that can come at a time when a woman's career is just taking off, when ambition is at its highest in their career journey, because those caring responsibilities can start to reshape how women see themselves at work. And it's something that they often don't notice until later. On a personal level, I finished a contract. I was looking for another opportunity, and I was starting to find that there was increased demand on my time for elder care. And I ended up not finding any additional work for almost 2 years, because I would not be actively looking for my next opportunity. I would talk myself out of attending a meeting or a pre-commissioning interview. And it wasn't until later that I realised that I'd sometimes self-sabotage the opportunities, but my focus on the elder care responsibilities was so demanding. I was navigating a completely different system of the sort of social and financial aspects of those. And I didn't have the bandwidth to cope with that. But when I was reflecting on it afterwards, I did recognize that had I been in full-time employment at the time that that had happened, I wasn't entirely sure how I could have made a success of my role at the same time as offering the level of support that I needed to.
But that goes back to, I think, what we talked about in, keep saying, a previous episode. I'll have to remember which one it was, around needing to perform. We're told to be, your family is important, put your family first,
Mhm.
and make sure your priority is your family. And yet in work, you're told, right, prioritize your work. And then you're in work and you're told, oh no, it's fine. And so there's this conflict constantly. I don't know if it's just with the with the females, but that sense of you can never win because your energy and your mental capacity is always for others. So, having to be successful, whatever that looks like, to achieve sometimes something you can't predict. So like being a new mother, for example, you are learning, if it's your first time, absolutely everything there is to know because you've never done it before. And then you're having your parents, it's basically having a baby, having to realize, what does the system look like? What things do they need to do? What financially support do they need? You are navigating a completely different world whilst also trying to keep your teeth into a world that you're just trying to function and cognitively go. Whilst the impact, what is the cost of that? Not only to you, but to your loved ones, for example.
Let's imagine that we have a woman who is, let's make her 35. She's got 2 school-age children, one in senior school, one currently in junior school. She's got elderly parents, and she's navigating, let's say, endometriosis. There will be goodwill, hopefully, on the part of her employers for a period of time. But all 3 of those situations, along with her team and her own workload, are difficult to pre-plan.
Yeah.
So how long is the goodwill and the empathy going to stay there?
I think if we go back to that percentage, so through the carers report, there's 35%. That's 35% of carers have either reduced their hours or turned down career, similar to what you were talking about, career progression.
Yeah.
Because of caring responsibilities. So that's over a third. And then 74% of unpaid carers, unsurprisingly, from what we've just been discussing, are feeling stressed or anxious. So I don't think that's a surprising stat, but it's not just about popping in, looking and make sure they're okay. You're becoming the parent. You are responsible for another person, but with different complexities completely altogether. And as people who have gone through this, appointments aren't necessarily in the time that you want.
Exactly.
You've got to think about transport. You've got to think about, how am I going to get out of that meeting to make sure they're okay? If you don't, the feelings of guilt, the inability to please. No wonder people are feeling stressed or anxious. I think, it's so much that not only is just needs addressed, but being kind and compassionate, that actually, if you are going through this situation, it's been put upon you, you've taken the responsibility, and you are trying to navigate a completely new landscape.
And another emotion that is there often is fear. And I hear this from women that I coach, that if people at work know that you're struggling personally, they may well start to question your capability
Absolutely.
and your commitment. So what you then often do, you manage it invisibly, and the self-doubt that we have on, am I justified in being here? Am I doing a good job? That happens more and more. But that also then becomes this negative circle that makes performing at and sustaining at that level so difficult.
Well, I'd like to say it's hard to sustain, isn't it? And, if you're looking at from leadership models, they still reward constant availability, visibility, long hours. And that model doesn't just disadvantage people with caring support. It just doesn't reflect what real life is for most people.
Yeah. As good as our employment law is in the UK compared to other countries, I think it is true to say that the workplace rarely makes it easy to people to ask for help. Yes, we've got the Carers Leave Act, which was introduced in April 24. It gives employees 1 week of unpaid leave per year to deal with caring responsibilities. And as we've said, and both experienced,
I think what was really interesting was how late it's taken for any kind of protection. 2024, that's only 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's still unpaid.
Yeah.
It's not recognised. It's almost like I always think it's interesting until it happens to somebody that has got
Yeah.
any kind of influence, then I start seeing change. Interestingly, I always think Sweden, they do really well. So Sweden
Yeah.
offers 100 days. So we do 1 week unpaid at 80% pay. Germany offers 10 paid days plus up to 6 months unpaid for long-term care. We are not only just behind, it's an insult. Like, I'm
Yeah.
smiling with laughter because I'm embarrassed.
Yeah.
It really demonstrates the stark difference of how we see work versus family life
Yeah.
and how our European cousins value family
Yeah.
over work. If anything can't say that loud enough, it's that stat.
Yeah. And the other thing is that on the news all the time, we do hear about the financial challenge of an aging
We
population.
are, yeah,
But if we're
definitely.
not supporting our workforce with that aging population, we're going to lose that workforce either because they opt out or because they're just going to disengage. The observation about Sweden in particular, my takeaway from that is that Sweden values its current employees to support its aging population, which can only do good things for the Swedish economy.
Oh, 100%. I think if employees feel that they have to hide the parts of their lives,
Yeah.
talking about obviously people being need to be switched on, etc., and having to do that, I think that impacts their well-being. It impacts their performance, which suffers. And so it's actually a risk to the organisation, but it's also a risk themselves to completely ignore that, I think. I think it's important to talk about the anticipatory grief because you are potentially not just talking about your elder cares who you're supporting around seeing them age or need support, or if something's happened and they've need recovery times, you are losing your own identity as
Yeah.
well. And you're losing who you are, talking about wanting to progress, for example. So the emotional landscape is difficult and you're grieving before someone's passed.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that has occurred to me from my own experience is that you're no longer somebody's child. So you're losing your identity in the workplace potentially because you have to sort of put on another persona as somebody navigating the care system or somebody trying to fight for benefits or asking for support using words that you don't really understand. You don't know the terminology of what you're asking for. You don't know which departments to go to
You're now
and
the
that
next of
sort of
kin.
thing. You're now a next of kin person.
Yeah.
And that anticipatory grief, it's something that we don't talk about enough, but anticipatory grief is part of that change of identity that you mentioned. That anticipatory grief, it's not simply about anticipating the death of somebody. That, of course, is a huge part of it, but it's the anticipatory grief around the change that comes as a result of their
Oh,
passing.
absolutely. It's all about the change. I think it's not just the physical of watching somebody. And then we're not just talking about someone just getting older. We're in this category, it's whoever you're caring for
Yeah,
that needs you. You're becoming more and more dependent, right? So
yeah,
you are needing to be more present. You're watching them change physically, even psychologically, if they've got a long-term illness with dementia or Alzheimer's, etc. That's a huge difference of personality, let alone just physical ill health. So there's so many elements of watching somebody that you've known
yeah,
not necessarily be the same person, knowing that they're still there, but they're not them anymore.
yeah,
And I think that's what we're really talking about but you're still having to be switched on. So you don't have the time to be able to process. But on your own, it's the shock system.
yeah. Well, you're watching your parent age, you're watching them become dependent, especially challenging if they are fiercely independent. You're watching their personality shift, sometimes dramatically, sometimes edges soften, sometimes you see edges harden. But also, when you're navigating those interactions with your parents, there are still connections back to your childhood. So something said in a moment of pain or within the context of dementia or Alzheimer's is really difficult to navigate and to rationalize. But that connection back to your childhood and the potential hurt that that might reignite, the trigger that it might cause, trying to make sense of it, but you're still trying to be a functioning professional. You're still trying to navigate all of the systems that we've talked about. You're still trying to be supportive of a partner, for example. You're still trying to be there as a parent. That's so much to try and navigate whilst so much is also changing.
And I think it is important to recognize that actually the emotional experience of becoming not just a strong one for people who are quite once strong with you, back to the reference, there's a lot of trauma around death, for example, but that's for another episode. I think there's so many elements to it. But that goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning about the relationship and the family dynamics, because it may not be the parent, it could be the grandparent.
Yeah.
It could be another element of who you're caring for in the families or whatever role you play. But it is completely disorienting. I can't say the word. What's the word? Disorienting. There you go. Wow, that's a mouthful for even me. But you're trying to do it with love, or you're navigating other family dynamics who can't cope with that. So there's so many elements to it.
Well, it's interesting because many of the women that I speak to seem to add the role of project manager of,
I think it's also
of the family, isn't it? And the caring responsibilities. And as we touched on at the top of the episode, that can sometimes happen overnight. So it's coordinating hospitals, as we've said, care plans, finances, the sibling dynamic, a whole episode there. The GP appointments, do you accompany? Do you not? What does the GP share? What do you share that you might feel uncomfortable sharing, etc.? Social services. As we've said, you're still leading teams and you're trying to appear composed, because I think that's women's default behaviour.
And in a nutshell, whether you're a leader or not, it just becomes survival.
One of the other things that we haven't talked about as well is the potential issue of care homes, the question of a care home, if it gets to that point. If you're making hard decisions in a workplace, you can often remove the emotion of it because you work through a problem, the scenarios of the solution, and one would hope that you then come up with the best outcome for the challenge. But the question of a care home, it's got massive weight to it. But also there's guilt. And that's often profound. And there's a sadness that comes with it, that we've talked about, that changed dynamic between parent and child now. And that's massively sad for a lot of people.
Well, trying not to be too eye-watering here, but the financial reality alone, how much do you actually think it is a week now? That can be paralysing. So if you think of an average salary, but this is thinking about a residential care. So the average cost of a residential care in the UK is £1,400 a week.
A week.
So that's covering everything. So that's £70,000 a year per person.
After tax.
Right. And so unless you've actually got your parents' assets, but even that will drop pretty quickly at that cost, including the home, that then fall below 23,000. They'll be expected to self-fund. And where does that pressure come? And I understand sometimes when I looked at this, why the importance for my European cousins about why families come together to support, because the weight of that financially, and then we talk about it, about our aging population, they have ill health for longer, and we don't necessarily always have a lifespan, for example. So therefore, you're just thinking that's so unsustainable, and the pressure, like you said, there's the emotional side, and there's the financial side,
Yeah.
and then there's the existence of you as the individual. Then, isn't it?
I mean, most people have absolutely no idea about this until they're in it. Who would sit down with a perfectly healthy parent in their 50s and say, just so we get ahead of the curve, we've been chucking out care homes for you?
I absolutely have. I have spoken to people who have spoken to their parents about what is your plan? How are we going to do this? What do you want? And when you're thinking about hospice care, for example, if you're thinking of, there's so much around advanced planning, because, if we're just thinking about now and the rise of living, if it's that now, what's it going to be in 10, 20 years, 30 years?
Yeah.
It's unsustainable. Is that the right word? Yeah.
Unsustainable. Yeah.
To expect people to keep paying at such a rate, they'll have literally the assets mean nothing really, because it's gone. So what I want to be able to really say is that there is support.
Yeah.
So although it feels eye-watering, there is support. So you're not alone. That's the first thing. But also there is so much information out there and so much organisations who can help. So for example, Age UK have absolutely excellent fact sheets, and they're free. They're really plain English. They're really genuinely useful. The stats that we've talked about today, that came from the Carers UK, and they have a helpline, which is so useful.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've ever used them, but is a lifeline to a lot of people, because they don't feel they can talk to their parents like they used to.
Yeah.
They can't identify with them. And your local council obviously has a duty to carry out a needs assessment if you ask for one. And we'll put all the resources and reference in there. But it is important to just make sure that people know that there is resources there for them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the stuff that nobody talks about, and the things that we wish that more women were told.
We always end with things we wish people had more of, or tidbits or support, because I think there's so much more we can talk about. I think we will absolutely talk more about this subject around elder care and what we can do. Pegsy, you can go first.
I think for me, going through the experiences with both of my parents was tough, made me much more keen to have a conversation with my family to say, I'm giving you permission now to know these things. So to know that I've got a will, to know that I've got a lasting power of attorney, to know that I trust you now when I'm in a good mental state to make the right decisions for me at a time when I may not be, to make the right decisions for when that time comes.
And I think also what's important is for those who don't have good relationships with their elders or looking after people, and it's a burden, do speak up, go seek help. I think it's important that even when we talk about work and we're asking for help, it's not a weakness. We talk about it all the time, but in leadership and in life, we want people to be empowered. We want people to be authentic. It is a huge skill for those you are leading, for people to see that you are human. Don't have to go in the detail, but actually, if you can ask for support and be open to go and say, right, I need this, then you're mirroring really well. And so for those who are listening, who are managing care and responsibilities, please stop minimizing what you're carrying. It is so significant. It is important. You don't have to understand the whole system. Also, it changes at such a speed anyway.
Yep.
So even if you are somebody who wants to know it, it's complicated. But ask for the care needs assessment. Find out more information. Use the resources that we put in our link. But also share responsibilities where possible with siblings, family members, as early as you can. Like Pegsy was talking about before a crisis happens. This is not talking about sudden incidents, but in terms of having conversations, This is so important. Give yourself permission to not hold it all together all the time. Use your friends, use your peers, go to a therapist and talk about it, go to a coach and talk about it. Have a safe space, whatever that looks like, to vent, to cry, to emotionally offload, because that actually is what you need in order to function. And I think we will do another episode around anticipatory grief.
Yeah, I think it's a really key thing because it's not simply elder care.
But it's allowed to be hard.
Yes. There are some good tips that we can give to managers. If somebody in the team is quiet or withdrawn, it's about having flexibility, not making assumptions. You are led by somebody else. So make sure you ask those of your own leader. Fundamentally, I would say lead with empathy first, build trust-based working relationships with your team, because that then creates the environment where you don't need to do detective work to find out the root cause of a problem. Hopefully this episode has resonated. If you're living with this right now or have been through it, we'd really love to hear from you. What do you wish you'd known? What made the difference? What would someone telling you just entering this season of life, what would you say to somebody? The more that we share information, the more that everybody grows.
I think what we've talked about as well before is the reason we asked you not just to follow and download and as far as on social as Heels in the Hierarchy, and we've talked about sharing your story, is because it builds community and connection. And when you're going through something like this, and we talked about it earlier around loneliness and isolation, because you're doing so much for so many people, the more we can share experiences. And that's the great thing about social media, is that you can be talking to complete strangers who resonate, who understand. And that's so freeing. So please share this episode with anyone that you think needs it, because they're absolutely not alone in this. There's something quietly profound about becoming the strong one for those who will want strong for you.
Yeah, and many women are doing that right now. They're still trying to lead, they're still trying to grow, they're still trying to show up fully at work and at home.
So if that is you, we see you. This episode was for you.
And maybe the future of leadership looks less like perfection and more like humanity.
So thanks for listening.
If this conversation has resonated, download it, like it, share it with somebody that might need to hear it.
And until next time,
keep your heels high and your standards higher.